Okay, so let's have a little look at this in a little bit more depth, and we'll see if it helps clarify a few points. So here's a quadratic equation, okay, and all quadratic equations equal 0. So first off, this one I know can be factorized, okay. So if I factorize it, I've got x and I've got x. Now I know 4 times 2 gives me 8 and 4 plus 2 gives me 6. So I know my numbers are plus 4 and plus 2. Okay. Now if I was to solve this equation, all we do is we take the numbers and we change the signs. So instead of plus 4 we get minus 4, and instead of plus 2 we get minus 2. Okay. Now these are what we call the roots. And what we mean by the roots is where the line cuts the x-axis, okay, because this equation can be drawn on a graph, okay, and we get what we call is a parabola, okay. So the parabola will cut the x-axis here and the x-axis here, okay. Now because we factorized this out, we know that the parabola will cut at minus 4 and minus 2. Okay, this is cast in concrete. So when you factorize an equation, or if you solve an equation by completing the square or using the formula, what you're doing is you're saying that if you were to draw the equation, the parabola will cut at these points. Okay, now sometimes it will cut at 2 points because the parabola comes down quite deep in the graph, so it cuts on its way down and it cuts on its way out. Sometimes we get a graph and it will come down and it will just kiss the x-axis, okay, and we'll get one root. Okay, so when you solve it, you'll get x equals 3 and x equals 3 because it's only touching at that one point. You do occasionally get an equation where if you were to graph it, then what would happen is the equation or the graph would do that. It wouldn't cut the x-axis at all, and this means that there are no roots because the graph doesn't cut the x-axis at all. So we say it has no roots, so there are no values for x. Now GCSE, we don't have this, okay. You will always have 1 or 2 roots, okay. Now if they said where is the turning point, let's do that. So they say where is the turning point. Okay, now what they mean by the turning point is this point here, okay, at the very tip of the curve. So they want to know where it is on the y-axis and where it is on the x-axis. So this is where you need to know how to write what we call a coordinate. Okay, and when you write a coordinate, it's written like this. So you have your x value first, and your y value second. Okay, so the coordinate for the turning point. Now if they've got this all gridded off, then you can read it off. Okay, in some of the questions in the assignment, it's gridded off, so you can read off what the solution is. Now sometimes they won't give you the solution, and there is a way of finding the turning point without having that. Okay, and we do that by completing the square, or actually we just start by completing the square. So if we've got x squared plus 6x plus 8, okay, and we just complete the square, we just go through the beginning of completing the square. So what we do is we take one of the x's, half of this value, which is plus 3, and then we would square it. Okay, now hopefully you know if you complete the square, all we need to know is what adjustment do we need to make to this to get us back to this equation. So if I square 3, I get 9. Okay, so that's good, but I want 8. So if I've got 9 but I want 8, I need to subtract 1. Okay, because if I multiply this out, I will get x squared, I will get 6x, but I'll get plus 9. And we want plus 8, so I need to take away 1, and then that will get me back to this equation. Okay, so now what we do is we want the turning point. We can take the turning point from this, and we do exactly the same as we've done up here. So what we do is we say that x equals, now we take the number and we change the sign. So x equals minus 3. Now y equals this number, okay, minus 1. We don't change the sign, we just leave it as it is. So x equals minus 3 and y equals minus 1. So here on this graph, this turning point will be at minus 3 on the x-axis, and on the y-axis it will be at minus 1. Okay, so if they said what's the coordinate, so remember it goes x, y, so x is minus 3 and y is minus 1. So that's the coordinate for that turning point. Okay, so you can do it by just starting off completing the square. Okay, so I'll just stop and do another one, and I'll show you this one as well. Okay, so we've got a new equation. Okay, so we've got x squared plus 8x plus 12. So I'm giving you ones here that will just factorize, but it will still be the same for any other equation. Okay, so we have 12, so 6 times 2 will give me 12, plus 6 plus 2 will give me 8. So that's ideal. So in my brackets I can put x plus 6 and x plus 2. So if I solve this equation, then x will equal minus 6 and x will equal minus 2. Okay, so I know that it's going to cut the x axis at -6, and it's going to cut at -2. So now if they ask me what's the turning point, and I have no grid to read it off, then I take the equation and I start completing the square. So I take one of the x's, half of this value, and square it. Okay, now 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16, but I want 12, so 16 minus 12, sorry, if I've got 16 but I want 12, I need to subtract 4. Okay, you will always need to subtract. Okay, so now I've got that x equals, take the number, change the sign, and y will equal -4. So in my coordinates, x always comes first, so that's -4, and y will also be -4. So this turning point for this equation, x will be -4 because the point will be directly under -4, and the y-axis, this will line up with -4 on the y-axis. Okay, so just doing this first bit of completing the square will give you the turning point. Okay, now because the parabola, okay, you can fold it in half. Okay, so the turning point is always the midpoint between these two. So the midpoint between -2 and -6 is -4. Okay, so you can find the x-axis by just finding the halfway point without even completing the square, but you need to complete the square to find where it is on the y-axis. Okay, so this always works. Okay, without exception, it always works. Okay, so I hope that helps a little bit. So for finding the turning point without a grid, then complete the square, put it in this form, and then you can find the coordinate of the turning point. Okay, this number here, +12, that's where the parabola will cut on the y-axis. Okay, if you remember when you are using the formula that this is A, this is B, and this is C. Okay, I remember C for cut. Okay, we call it the y-intercept, but I call it C for cut because it cuts the y-axis at that number. Okay, hope that helps. Any other problems, then you know where I am.